We moved from Massachusetts to Alaska in the summer of the bicentennial year, away from the crowds who'd been reenacting the Revolutionary War for years already, to the wilderness known as Valdez. My family was me, my mom and my dad, and our cat Lucy. Valdez in the late 70s was about as Wild West as you could get. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline was nearing completion. The Alyeska terminal sat at the end of the line like a bartender clutching a tap handle. RatNet was the television in Valdez back then, if you subscribed to the one cable channel. It was a hodgepodge. It was the best of the Seattle networks on one tape, commercials and all. And in a best-case scenario, the tape went to Kodiak, then to Cordova, then came to Valdez. And you were watching shows that were about 3 weeks old. And if the tapes didn't show up, then you were watching yesterday's shows, which weren't really yesterday's shows anyway. We didn't have cable in South Central Trailer Court number 3. It just hadn't been run in yet. We were stuck with the radio. And in the late 70s, Valdez didn't have a local radio station. We had KBYR piped in from Anchorage. And this is when KBYR was still a music station. Jack Frost was the morning show host, prior to his career hawking persimmons and lobster for a certain grocery. Jack made radio fun, and as the only source of real-time news and information in Valdez, everybody listened.
KJON, all John, all the time.
We'd make the trek from Valdez to Anchorage 3 or 4 times a year. It was about 306 miles, depending on which version of the milepost you were looking at. And on a good day, we'd get up early, drive to town, put in a half day of shopping, and drive back. You've done that before too. When you leave Valdez and get to Keystone Canyon, that's when you lose KBYR. And in those days, if you didn't have an 8-track player, you'd be singing show tunes and campfire songs, at least until you got to Copper Center. That's where you could pick up Glen Ellen's radio station. And that's the first time that I ever heard the Caribou Clatter. Now, the Caribou Clatter was a way to get messages to people who lived off the grid. People who lived in places that still aren't even places today. The Caribou Clatter messages, they sounded a lot like this. To Cora and Clem at Johnson Creek, Aunt Sarah wants you to know that Uncle Jeb's operation went just fine, the root canal took, and we should be home by the weekend. To Betty Jean and the girls at Moose Camp, the laundry soap and feminine hygiene products you requested will be on the mail plane on Thursday. Love, Dan. To Norton and Doris up at Eagles Ridge, the boys made it safely back to town. They didn't get a moose, but they did get a pile of muskrat. You know the way Alva cooks them, them will be goody.
KJON, all John, all the time.
In the summer of 1981, my world was ripped apart, torn asunder. Not only was I in the midst of puberty, but disco was dying. And we moved to Anchorage. I lost all of my friends. I was going to a brand new junior high and starting over. But on the plus side, I got 3 television channels and more than a dozen radio stations. I watched TV as much as I could, which was pretty much all the time. But I was in bed at night at 8 o'clock almost every night faithfully to listen to Herb Shainlin and the talk show. But it was Friday nights with Herb that I lived for. That's when the talk show became desperate and dateless. Yes, it's exactly like it sounded. It was the dating game on the radio. Herb would get some guy on the line and he'd say, I'm talking with Steve, and he's looking for a lady between the ages of 18 and 35. And he'd chat Steve up for a little while and get some female callers on the line. They'd talk to the guy would talk to them, and eventually he'd have to pick one and the process would start all over again. I don't know how many marriages or divorces resulted from that show, but it was a cheap thrill for a junior high school boy on a Friday night.
Teen angst. Sure, we've all heard about it, but what do we really know? Teen angst is brought on by a combination of peer pressure and puberty, often exacerbated by nocturnal emissions, also known as wet dreams. This message is brought to you by your friends at Linen Factory, because a fresh set of sheets can be a teenager's best friend. KJON. All the hits, all the time. But I've never heard that song. Oh shit, it's in his head, not yours.